Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Every Which Way podcast. This one is late, and I know, and I haven't said anything about it or given any explanation, and for that I do apologize. But to be truthful, my energy levels are incredibly dangerously low, and I have retreated more inward, and I have been trying to rest and recuperate. So let me tell you guys. So last Saturday, I had to work overtime at work, which that's fine. My research was done by then. But with that being said, it does take a lot because I'm not going to lie, and this might sound whiny and I do apologize, but I am the breadwinner of the household and I do most of the household work as well, which I'm going to have to talk to my partner about, and I know that. But the main reason why this time of year always really gets me is not so much in relation to my own mental illness. Back in 2011, Christmas 2011, while I was not as devoted to my path as I am now, my stepdad decided to spend all of the extra Christmas money that my mother was going to use for presents to replace a windshield for a car. And that wasn't exactly necessary because at the time they had 3 vehicles. So there was an extra one that he could have used. And while it sucked knowing that I wasn't going to be able to get any presents unless I bought them myself, and I did, it was my mom, how she reacted, and she was very upset, and she cried a lot, because at the time, we were also raising my 2 nephews, Hunter and Christian, and just seeing my mom so upset, and so hurt, and crying like that, left a very deep wound for me. And I was only like 21 at the time, so my brain wasn't fully developed. And ever since then, like, the holiday season has never really been my favorite, and it's just been a struggle for me to really do much of anything. And I don't like really talking about it, but I feel like in this instance, you guys should know, at least have an explanation as to why I'm not as present during the December month. That's why. And I think what I'm going to do the next year, 2025, is that when it comes to December, I'm just going to take the whole month off and do research for podcast topics and stuff like that, and to just focus on my rest, my mental health, and try to get the spirit of the holidays back that I had lost. Now that sucks, I know, but as of right now, that looks like what I'm going to do next year, just to save everyone the hassle and the heartache, and maybe I will still do something. Like maybe I'll do extra research and topics throughout the year. That way, so you guys have something to listen to over December. But I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do it, not gonna lie. And this idea just came to me a couple minutes ago. So that's where I'm at. But I do want to apologize, especially to my patrons, because you guys pay for content access early, and I did not deliver on that. And that does not make me feel good. And I'm sure that doesn't really make you guys feel justified in paying for Patreon, those who do. So, I wanted to give you all an update and let you guys know where I'm coming from that way, so hopefully you can understand my decision going forward, at least for right now, and what I plan to do next year. But today's episode is an interesting one, something that I'm fascinated in, and I know that some of my own witchy pagan friends are interested in. And I learned a lot, and I really enjoyed it. I am talking about Old Norse paganism, or Old Norse heathenry, okay? Sorry guys, I'm drinking tea. I am drinking Island Mango Green Tea from the Dollar Tea Club, which is now defunct. At least I think they became Mosey Tea, and it's just not the same, it's not as good. But yeah, so let's get into it, because this is a very long topic and my notes are quite long and lengthy, so hold in tight because this is doozy. And they're written, I didn't really transfer them to electronic notes, so these are written. So for those of you who are watching this, if I'm not looking at the camera a whole lot, that's why. I apologize. But let's crack in. So what exactly does the term Old Norse mean anyway? Well, it's basically kind of like a catch-all term for early Scandinavian culture, which early Scandinavia is the geographical area of Europe that encompasses Sweden, Iceland, Denmark, Norway, etc. The languages of the people living in this area aren't confined in the geographical boundaries of the Nordic countries, because they weren't established back then. They were just like territories, okay? So, such languages stemmed from a Proto-Nordic language, which became divided around 600 to 800 BCE into a West Nordic language called Old Norse, and the East Nordic languages, which are referred to as Old Danish and Old Swedish. Many scholars today use the term Old Norse as an umbrella phrase for all Germanic languages that were spoken in early Scandinavia and kind of the culture of that geographical area. I hope that made sense, because to be very transparent and open, finding like good sources was like scholarly sources, and being able to translate what they say into a way that I understand it and I can convey was difficult. And part of that is because a lot of stuff was not written down for a long time. A lot of tales and legends and mythology was often orally spoken and is of more of an oral tradition. And of course, when that happens, things can get confused, lost in translation, all that stuff. So it is a bit of a mess. It is a bit of a mess. But I did try to get it as straight as I could as far as stuff and things. Now, it is important to note before we really delve even deeper into this topic that, again, a lot of cultures for a long time, and some even still today, didn't have written texts. Even if they did, being able to write and read was mainly a privilege for the aristocracy or the wealthy and powerful. Most historical or folkloric information was passed along via that oral tradition that I mentioned. That presents its own problems, naturally. So you can see how this topic can get muddled, messy, and complicated, and it is. People, places, events, and even religion and religions were no exception to the oral traditions of pre-Christian civilizations. So what is religion, and where did the word come from? Well, religion comes from the Latin term religio, which means obligation, conscience, or worship of God or gods. It also is connected to the verb religare, meaning to reconnect or bind. The Merriam-Webster dictionary has 4 definitions of religion. The first one being a personal set or institutionalized system of attitudes, beliefs, and practices. The second is the service and worship of gods or the supernatural. The third is a cause, principle, or system of beliefs held to with ardor and faith. And 4, scrupulous conformity. So there we go. Oftentimes, a specific term for religion was not used, at least during this time frame in this region. And in the instances where it was more referred to as the old ways, the old custom, or the heathen customs, and when it was translated, or called fornsider in the, Nordic terminology, fornsider. During the time of the Old Norse civilizations, the people didn't merely believe in their deities, but also performed actions and modeled behavior after and for them. We're talking rites, judicial acts, and behavior that mark some kind of ownership or belonging. Perhaps the most important sources about Old Norse paganism are the poems of the Elder Edda and the Younger Edda, which are also called the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda, respectively. But I want to note here that these 2 Eddas were written by Christian writers and are how Christians perceived the Nordic customs and deities and mythologies, so take that with a grain of salt. What sources were from this time period are few and far between, but descriptions and writings were left by Arabic travelers, Western Europe Christian accounts, early legal texts, skaldic poetry, and runestones. Archaeological evidence has also been found pertaining to early Old Norse heathenism, such as hammers and jewelry. There's also been speculations that the Norse gods themselves were actually birthed from the Mediterranean region due to similarities between them and the Roman or Etruscan deities. Gold bracteates with depictions of Nordic deities like Odin, Balder, and Tyr have been found dating back to the Iron Age, at least 300 years prior to the start of the Viking period. And I will go over a timeline here shortly. So, again, the histories and accounts and records of these early Scandinavian civilizations and cultures primarily relied on oral traditions, memory, and the runic system, which we now refer to as the Elder Futhark. It's possibly that this stemmed from an old Germanic religion as well, but there is not a whole lot of evidence as of the recording of this podcast to yay or nay. Hold on. Sorry about that interruption, everyone. Getting back into Old Norse paganism. So it was decentralized, meaning that there was no core ideology or central authority behind it. This is due to there being no holy manuscripts, scriptures, or key figures that guided practices or beliefs. This also means there were no creeds, dogmas, or doctrines. It grew organically in the numerous cultures that resided in the region through family, community, regional customs, superstitions, and folklore. And because I'm such a nice person, I have a timeline, at least for how things progress, up until it's no longer considered, up until the Eddas are written, okay? Which is kind of where, in a way, the timeline shifts from it being Old Norse heathenry to more modern day, if that makes sense. And I'm not gonna lie, I needed to stop somewhere because these notes were getting long. But let's begin on the timeline. So, first we have the Proto-Norse culture that appeared in Europe around 1700 BCE. It stemmed from the hunter-gatherer pitted wares culture that centered around southern Scandinavia and the Indo-European European battle axe culture of the Scandinavian peninsula. These two cultures melded and combined and began the Nordic Bronze Age, which began roughly around 1750 BCE and lasted up until 500 BCE. This new culture practiced agriculture, animal husbandry, and traded with Mycenaean Greece. Mythology during this time is quite fragmented, but what archaeologists have been able to find supports the presence of sun worship. In addition, there's also evidence that this Proto-Norse culture made a mythological connection between the sun and horses. Pretty much a horse drawing the sun across the sky and another one drawing the moon across the sky. Apart from that, there's been nothing concrete as of the recording of this episode that proves gods that were similar to those in contemporary Norse pantheon were venerated by this culture at this time. Okay? So there is nothing to support that during this period of time that the Norse deities that we are more familiar with nowadays were venerated by this Proto-Norse culture. Sorry, I need a drink. Following the Nordic Bronze Age stems the Nordic Iron Age, which lasted from 500 BCE to 800 CE, and is actually divided into three periods. the pre-Roman Iron Age, which lasted from 500 to 0 BCE. The second period is the Roman Iron Age, which lasted from 1 to 400 CE. And lastly, the Germanic Iron Age, which lasted from 401 to 800 CE. Okay? It was during this time period that ironworking was introduced by the Hallstatt culture from Eastern Europe, and iron extracted from bog peat is used to craft wares and weaponry. Coinciding with the Iron Age, Roman historian Publius Cornelius Tacitus wrote Germania, and he did that in 998 CE, and it describes the ethnography of ancient Germanic civilization, being the culture and such things. Tacitus never actually set foot in the region or even really observed any of the Germanic cultures for himself. He actually sourced his information from other written works and even secondhand accounts and interviews. He described the people in this region in a rather derogatory manner, portraying them as drunken, lazy, brutal, and uncultured. Germania is the oldest surviving written record of ancient heathen customs and was a source in the late 19th and early 20th centuries that helped to shape the ideologies of Odinism as well as Nazi beliefs. So there we go. Moving on from that, we come to 701 to 1100 CE, and it was during this time frame that the Scandinavian territories were slowly converted to Christianity. Now, this is a bit unique because the Scandinavian people weren't actually forced to give up their cultural identities during this process, as Christian divine figures were incorporated into the Norse practices, customs, beliefs, folklores, and attitudes. Most often than not, when civilizations were being converted to Christianity, they had to give up what made them culturally unique and different and had to forsake their own deities and rites and practices, but not so much with the Norse. This blending saw figures like Jesus and Mary being invoked alongside figures like Thor. Long form writing was also introduced during this period, and most of what was written about Old Norse cultures comes from this time because of that. Following the conversion to Christianity, or rather, I suppose, at the same time as it was going on. Yes, at the same time it was going on, from 793 to 1066 CE, was what's known as the Viking Age. This was a time when the Scandinavian people traversed a large portion of Europe and the Middle East, and was a period of extensive exploration, trade, and raids. It was Christian monasteries that the Vikings raided the most due to their abundant resources and, to be quite frank, pitiful defenses. That's why they were stereotyped as bloodthirsty brutes. Christian manuscripts recorded these raids, and manuscripts have been found with the mentions of them. Leif Erikson visits America around 1000 CE, and the Viking Age ended with the Battle of Stamford Bridge in England, and it's often regarded as the end of Old Norse civilization. Most of what's known of Old Norse paganism comes from this period of time. And after this, I only have three more notes that I want to touch on as far as the timeline, but I did stop there because around this time is when it's considered the end of Old Norse civilization. And I would stop there for that reason. But let's continue and finish up this timeline. So, a guy by the name of Saxo Grammaticus wrote Gesta Danorum, or the Danish History, in 1208 CE, which is a patriotic account of the history of the Danes and features accounts that overlap with regional folklore and mythologies. In 1220 CE, politician Sonri Sturluson wrote the Prose Edda, or the Younger Edda, and 50 years after that, the Codex Regius is written in 1270 by unknown authors and is also referred to as the Poetic Edda. And that's all I have on the timeline. So, very rich history, and it spans over a long time frame. Now that we kind of have a sense of time frame and know a little bit about what was, I suppose, going on and why some things are not quite as well known or developed, let's focus on the actual mythology of the Old Norse heathen cultures and all that good jazz. Let's start with the creation myth, the Old Norse creation myth. So, in the beginning, there was a never-ending expanse of void called Ginnungagap. Ginnungagap. It's tasty to say. And again, this was an expanse of void, so there was nothing really in there except on one side of Ginnungagap was a wasteland of frozen fog called Niflheim. And on the other side was a raging inferno of flames called Muspelheim. Together, these two swirled and combined to create Ymir, the first giant, and Audumbla, the cosmic cow. Ymir was not exactly a great person, but he grew to enormous size after drinking Audumla's milk. And Audumbla was nourished by the salt that they lit from Ginnungagap's rin. Eventually, Ymir fell into a deep sleep, and while he slept, the first female and male Jotun, which were a race of giants, sprouted from his armpit, while a six-headed troll grew from his thighs. These beings quickly had offspring of their own. At the same time, Audumbla licked a man out of the salty ice from Ginnungagap's rim. The man's name was Buri, and he eventually had a son named Bor, who married a giantess named Bestla. Buri and Bestla had 3 half-Jotun sons, and they were named Lodor, or Ve, Vili, or Honir, and Odin. Odin and his brothers killed Ymir, and there was so much blood, because again, Ymir was a giant, that every Jotun and troll except for Bergelmir and his wife drowned. Odin and his brothers fashioned the world from Ymir's corpse. His blood became the oceans, his flesh the soil, his bones the mountains, and his teeth the boulder and rocks. Ymir's eyelashes became a barrier that separated Midgard, or Earth, from Jotunheim, the world of the Jotun. The brothers forced Niflheim underground and divided the fires of Muspelheim into numerous places, such as the sky, to become stars. Ymir's brains became the clouds, and his skull the firmament, which was upheld by 4 dwarves named Nodri, north, Vestri, which I think is west, Sudri, south, and Osri, which is east. Now, the brothers, who were also referred to as Aesir gods, held a council to determine the positions of the stars, the passage of days, and the passing of months and years. Time passed by, and the sun's warmth and the falling rain helped the grass, plants, and trees to spring up. Soon, a plethora of animals and spirits populated the earth. One day, while on a walk with his brothers by the sea, Odin came across an elm tree and an ash tree, from which he and his brothers crafted the first woman, Embla, and the first man, Ask. Each brother bestowed upon them a gift. Odin gave them the breath of life or soul. Honir gave them spirit, mind, and will, and Ludor gave them feeling, blood, and lively complexions. Embla and Ask produced many children, thus giving rise to human beings. So yeah, quite a story, was it not? I enjoyed it. And I left some parts out because if I didn't, it would go on for a while. But I bet that some of you are wondering, what about the tree? What about Yggdrasil? Well, Yggdrasil was made of the body of Ymir, is an evergreen cosmic ash tree that connects the 9 different realms with its roots and branches. It is the home of all the world's beings, including forest stags that chew at the leaves, an eagle who perches at the top to watch over the realms, the dragon Nidhogg who dwells beneath it to gnaw on its roots, and Ratatoskr, a squirrel who carries information and gossip between the eagle and Nidhogg the dragon. Yggdrasil is constantly in a state of death and rebirth, from animals and Nidhogg causing it to wither from chewing on it, and from the Norns, who are 3 women of fate who rejuvenate and sustain it. The tree's roots delve down into 3 wells or springs, and they are called the Well of Urder, the Well of Mimir, and oh goodness, Hivgurlmir. I'm really sorry about that. Hivgurlmir. Sure. Councils and assemblies are held by the gods daily at Yggdrasil. Once, Odin hung himself from the branches, sacrificing himself to himself. He was also impaled with a spear, and he hung there for 9 days and 9 nights. Afterwards, he became incredibly wise and learned the secrets of writing, as well as the runes. So now that we know the creation myth and a little bit about Yggdrasil, what is death and the afterlife like? How did the Old Norse pagans view it as? Well, death is, as an imminent faith, Old Norse prioritized life experience and well being over the worries of the afterlife. Life is lived to cultivate current well being and fulfillment, as a good afterlife is already guaranteed. At least if you do things, we'll get there. Separation between life and death isn't clean cut. Death was a gradual transition of a state of being, which is why ancestors can directly involve themselves with the living family and vice versa. Unless a person chose to incorporate workings that focus on death and the afterlife into their practice, the afterlife, they weren't a focus or a concern. Afterlife beliefs are muddled due to a lack of archaeological evidence and written folklore, but there are a few things that we do know. The Old Norse people believed they'd reunite with their ancestors after death. A person would spend their afterlife doing the activities they enjoyed while alive. The deceased could be asked to provide aid to their living family, and that the dead could and would return as restless spirits if their death was unsatisfactory, if they felt they had unfinished business, or if it had a bad temperament. Such spirits were referred to as draugr. After Christianity became blended with the Old Norse beliefs and customs, the Scandinavian cultures transitioned from an immanent faith model to a transcendent faith model, thus changing how they viewed the afterlife. This new perspective introduced new realms, or halls, that a person could enter after death. Many of these halls were viewed more desirably than the traditional underworld, but a person had to live or die in a specific way to enter one of these halls. And I do have some of the more, I don't want to say popular, but more, I guess, the popular ones, the ones that are most known. The first one I have is Folkvanger. This is one of the places those who fell in battle went to. This hall belongs to the goddess Freya. Freya is said to have had the first pick of fallen warriors, even before Odin. And this hall's proper name is actually Sessrumnir. Next up, we have Valhalla, which I'm sure more of you are familiar with. This is Odin's hall for warriors who were killed in battle. The Valkyries collected the warriors to become Einherjar, who are trained warriors who are to fight for Odin during Ragnarok. These warriors feast during the day, feast and skirmish in their afterlives until Ragnarok transcends. Next up is Ron's Hall. This is the watery hall for those who died at sea. Following that, we have Hel, or Helheim, the Norse underworld, which was not a good or bad place. Those who died of sickness or old age came here. It is located in the north, which is the direction of death in Scandinavian folklore. It is kept separate from the realm of the living by the river Jol, and is guarded by the wolf Garm. It shares a name with the Norse goddess of death, Hel. The dead of Helheim are prophesied to fight against the Aesir gods when Ragnarok comes. The following one that we have is Nostrand, or the Corpse Shore, which is located in Hell. and is where the dragon Nidhogg resides. This is where the worst human offenders go to when they die. It is decorated with the spines of serpents and a roof that constantly leaks poison onto its inhabitants. We have Helgafell, known as the Holy Mountain. It was in this hall where people would reunite with their ancestors. And the final one that I want to briefly touch on is Gimle, the heavenly hall that would rise up after Ragnarok destroyed everything else. So now that we have that covered, let's talk about Old Norse paganism and the soul. And the reason why I touch on this is because I think it's fascinating and different than I think a lot of other cultures or religions. So, a soul has multiple parts that make it whole, like a puzzle. 4 are the most commonly accepted amount, but the number of these soul pieces may vary. These parts all work in tandem, each being equally significant and crucial, and neither outshining the other. So these 4 parts, I have them, and I'll let you know what they are right now. So the first one we have is Hamar. This is the outer appearance, the physical form of a person. But it's also a person's airs and how they present themselves, if that makes sense. This can be manipulated by the mind and through altering the physical appearance. It is left behind after death. The next soul part is Hugr. This is the mind, emotions, and will. It's governed by one's consciousness, and it departs the body after death. The third portion is called Fylgha. This is known as the fetch or follower, and is the core essence of an individual. Capable of astral travel. Odin's ravens, Hugin, which means thought, and Munin, which is memory, are Fylgja. And the final one that I have is Haminga. This represents a person's proclivities and potential. What are one's strengths and weaknesses, natural talents, stuff like that. And it is believed to be passed down through the family tree or hereditarily. Now, I do have the 9 realms listed here, and these are the 9 realms that are connected via Yggdrasil. And if I recall correctly, these are the 9 that became more prominent or more in focus and importance as Old Norse heathenism was slowly converted into Christianity. So at the top, if we're looking at it like a tree, okay? At the very top, the canopy, the top portion, we've got Asgard, which is the home of the Aesir gods. And the Aesir gods are the ones who prefer battle, who are quote-unquote bloodthirsty, and aren't as reserved. They don't really focus on beauty or nature so much as the fight. And it is perched high atop Yggdrasil's branches. And this is where the Hall of Valhalla resides. Following that, we have Alfheim, which is the realm of the light elves. And these are beings of tremendous beauty. If I recall correctly... Nope. Okay, so I was wrong. But this Alfheim is ruled by the god Freyr, and is a realm heavily associated with magic, music, and the arts. Now, once we get from that, so in our tree analogy, Asgard is at the top portion of the canopy. Alfheim is kind of the bottom portion of the canopy. The next 5 realms, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, the next 5 realms kind of encompass the middle portion, so the trunk from that low canopy down to where the roots on the surface start to sprout out, okay? So first up, we have one that you're probably going to think is familiar, Niflheim. This is the realm of primordial ice and mist beings. It's the embodiment of the raw, untamed nature of the universe, and is placed to the north of Midgard. Following that is Jotunheim, which is the realm of the giants, who are called Jotnar. This is a mountainous and heavily forested area, and is home to the giants, who often fight against the Aesir gods. And this is located to the east of Midgard. So these following Niflheim, Jotunheim, and the following 2, think of them not as a step, like one down from the next. They're all kind of like on the same expanse, on the same plane. It's just Niflheim is to the north, Jotunheim is to the east. It's to the east. Following that, we have Muspelheim, which is the realm of the fire giants, and is governed by a giant called Surtur. It is a land of fire, extreme heat, and flames, and is placed to the south of Midgard. Up next, we have Vanaheim, which is the realm of the Vanir, who are gods of fertility, prosperity, and foresight. This is a realm of nature, peace, harmony, and the cycle of life. The stable, it's the counter of the Aesir. So this is, and the Vanir deities are the stable, balanced opposite of the Aesir, and is located to the west of Midgard. And then finally, we have Midgard, which is the realm of human beings, and it is located in the mid-center of the plane analogy of Yggdrasil's trunk, okay? And is surrounded by an immense ocean and Jormungandr, who is a giant serpent, and it is connected to Asgard via the Bifrost, which is a rainbow bridge. So, Niflheim, Jotunheim, Muspelheim, Vanaheim, and Midgard, they are the trunk, but they're not steps like a stairwell. They're more of a plane. On a map, they're like a plane. Midgard's in the center, Niflheim's in the north, Jotunheim's in the east, Vanaheim is in the west, and Muspelheim is in the south, okay? So that would mean that the roots and a little part of like the visual roots of Yggdrasil is the Svartfellheim, or the Nidvalir, which is the realm of dwarves. It is below the middle expanse of the above realms, and the dwarves who reside here are masters at metalcraft and created most of the weapons that the gods use. And the last that we have is Helheim, or Hell. This is the underground where the deep roots of Yggdrasil go. It's the realm of the dead, ruled by Hel, who, in addition to being the goddess of death, is also the daughter of the god Loki. It is cold and shrouded in mist, and is often described as dreary and somber. Okay. So let's talk about Ragnarok. Okay? Ragnarok. First of all, it means reckoning of the gods. It is the inevitable terrible battle that will end the Norse gods. The sign of its arrival is a winter that lasts for 3 consecutive years, and it is called Fumbelwinter. In Asgard, a golden rooster will crow and will be answered by a soot black one in Helheim. These crows are signaling the approach of it. The serpent Jormungandr, whose grasp on his own tail that kept the bonds of the world securely in place, will release his tail, thus freeing entities such as Fenrir, who is a wolf and one of Loki's offspring, who is prophesied to devour the sun and Odin, as well as Loki himself, who had been chained to a rock after causing the death of another god. Garm, who is the wolf who guards Helheim, will also be released. One of the Aesir gods, Heimdall, will blow the Gjallarhorn to signal to the gods and warriors of Valhalla that war is upon them. The fire Jotnar of Muspelheim, the dead of Helheim, and the wild beings of Jotunheim will attack the Aesir gods. Jormungandr will kill Thor. Loki and Heimdall kill each other. And of course, Fenrir swallows the sun and the moon, and Odin. All in the world burns and crumbles during this terrible battle before everything is plunged into darkness. Nidhogg will emerge from the ground and soar above the ruins. But not all is completely lost, because from the ashes, a new world or realm is born. The deceased god of light, Balder, who is the god that Loki killed, will return to life and join the few gods who managed to survive Ragnarok. Honir will cast prophetic lots, and the hall, known as Gimli, will be built. And the last thing that I want to touch on, these are notes that I didn't really know where to fit in this episode. Like, I didn't know how to mesh them in properly, but I wanted to touch on them anyway. So, to wrap things up, here we go. So, there is in Old Norse paganism and Old Norse heathenism, there is this term called orlog, which is the relationship between actions and outcomes. So in a way, it's kind of like a life cycle, but not focusing on life, but on actions and outcomes. Past outcomes influence present reality. Present reality influences present actions. Present actions influence future outcomes, and future outcomes become reality and transition into past outcomes. This cycle is never ending and non-linear. Actions and outcomes are the threads that comprise the web of the weird, which is destiny. So this is the reason why this is important, is because it ties back into how before Christianity, Old Norse paganism was more of the imminent faith type of tradition, focusing more on the life here and now than what awaits after death. morality for them was made by people for people and focused more on people's well-beings. So it wasn't so much as be good so you can get into heaven. It was more of be good so that other people will be okay, if that makes sense. Early Scandinavian cultures had two concepts of the world at large: the inner yard or innangard, and the outer yard, the utangard, which were the tame lands and the wild unknown. So the inner yard is where the community resided. It was where the farmland was. It was comfortable, familiar, and safe. This is where people lived. It was a reprieve from the mysterious, unknown wilderness that possessed danger and also adventure. So while people recognized the dangers around them, it was important to establish a mutually beneficial relationship with the outer yard as a part of reality, because they recognized that they were not separate from what was unknown, but they were a part of it, and it was about mutual respect and recognition. Because they couldn't make it go away, it was always there, but if it was treated with dignity and respect, then nothing too awful could happen. Or if something awful did happen, it wasn't the end of the world like Ragnarok. And the last thing that I wanted to touch on was animism. Animism is the recognition that everything in life has agency and that no one thing is more important than anything else. It was an important component of Old Norse paganism, and it is a view that divinity is actually a property of existence instead of a goal or war to achieve it. And it was, like I said, it was a part of Old Norse heathenry. It was something that they recognized, that they thought was important, and a part of existence, a natural part of existence. And that's all I have for you guys. So I hope that that was informative and educational, and I hope that you had fun and that you learned something, because Goddess knows that I learned quite a bit myself. And I enjoyed researching the topic, I really did. It's fun to learn about how older cultures and civilizations saw the world and how they believed that things were created. And it gives us a different perspective now in the present, which with as developed as we are, I feel like it's looking back, it's a reminder that we can, if we choose to be, we can have this connection to nature and the world around us. We don't have to be apart from it. I hope that makes sense. And I hope that you enjoyed this episode. I really do. I know that I said that the week of the 23rd I was going to take off. I'm going to take off the rest of this month. So you will not be getting another episode until January of 2025. And I'm doing this for my own mental health so that I can be okay and be able to bring forth content in the new year in a more timely manner, but also doing it better. Because this has been a little over a full year, maybe about a year and a half, roughly, not quite there yet. And, but yeah, I want to focus on being okay and making sure that I'm okay. And I hope that you guys don't mind that I'm doing that. I really hope that you don't mind, because I do need the rest. I've needed I've needed the hibernation part of this season for a long time. And while I've been able to do a little bit of it, I haven't been able to do enough that I feel like I'm bouncing back in relatively good time. So yeah. But I want to thank you guys for joining me on this episode of the Every Which Way podcast. If you could do me a favor and share this around, that would be great. But if not, that's fine. And I do have a Patreon. If you can contribute, that'd be great. That would certainly help me with getting better equipment and stuff like that. But if not, if all you do is listen, thank you. It does mean a lot that you take time out of your day to listen to me. And I hope that you all have a blessed Yule, a Merry Christmas, a Happy Hanukkah, a great Kwanzaa, a wonderful Wintermas, and be safe, and take care of yourself, and I'll see you guys in the new year.